Good morning. Well, welcome to the North Shore Unitarian Church, where our mission is to empower people to live lives of greater depth, meaning, and purpose. My name is Marcus Hartlief. I'm honored to be one of your co-ministers, along with Emily Hartlief, who is taking the, I think, bold and courageous move today of answering any questions that you care to share. Welcome to this community where we embrace everyone who walks through our door, regardless of how you make your living, who you love, or how you name the sacred. It's good to be together. One of the favorite things of mine that we do is our whole lives sexuality education. It's a program that was started all the way back in the 70s, updated in the 90s, and we offer modules for different age groups, all the way from kindergarten and first graders up through adults. And the core of it, of course, is right at that 12, 13, adolescence, puberty time. And it's a long curriculum. Emily and I have taught it both separately and together. And what I love about it is that we offer a program where young people especially, get to reflect on the deeper meaning around sexuality, the values and the morals, the skills and the choices that the school curriculums around this don't really cover. One piece of the curriculum is the question box. At the end of every Our Whole Lives OWL session, there's an opportunity for everyone in the class to put an anonymous question into the question box. And we do this at the end of the class so that then the teachers have a week to think about these questions before trying to answer them at the following session. Because the questions, especially those 12, 13, 14-year-olds, the questions that they will ask in that question box, they will shock us and delight us and amuse us and make us run to Google searching for answers to what does that word actually mean. And then there's, of course, the next week begins with responding to these questions. And it's fun, it's silly, everybody laughs, and it's also a real valuable opportunity for these folks to get accurate answers to questions that there may not be any other venue in their lives to receive this information. This is one of our values as Unitarian Universalists, that people deserve accurate, scientifically grounded answers to their questions. And also that it's good to come together and ask the questions that are on our hearts, whether they have to do with sexuality or spirituality, whether they have to do with the meaning of existence or how to figure out how to get through my day-to-day. Whatever our questions are, it's good to be together, wrestle with them, and that wrestling may be even more important than the answers. So that's what this day is all about. And if you haven't put in a question and you have one and you'd like to now, I happen to have some index cards. And oh, good, excellent.
Okay, so this is the fun part. Marcus is going to collect cards if any are not in yet. Do any of you listen to radio call-in hours? Kind of like, it's a bad example, but Dr. Laura, right? There's one that I like that's been a podcast called Dear Sugar, and the tagline is radically empathetic advice. So I think I'd like to invite you to think about this as kind of like a radio call-in hour on life, on faith, on religion, on meaning. And the idea for this service was inspired by one of my mentors, one of my favorite ministers, Reverend Rob Hardies, who serves a congregation in Washington, D.C. And he does this every year. Actually, at the end of August, he has a question box sermon, and they're one of my favorite to listen to, so I decided that I should try it out. And I think that as our faith, as our tradition is often kind of described by people from the outside, it's called either two things. Oh, Unitarian Universalists, they don't believe in anything, Or Unitarian Universalists, they believe in everything. And I'm here to tell you both of those are wrong. And so I think the questions that you have given me will get us there. But I do think that I just wanted to start by saying I think it's very important for us to get better and better at articulating what we do believe and what is important to us and what we do value, because it's a dangerous time to think that it's okay to believe anything or that it's okay for anyone else to believe whatever they want. Because there's actually very serious consequences for some beliefs, and I think those need to be addressed, particularly by communities of kind of courage and love, which is what I think churches are at their best. Places where we learn to love each other better and be more bold and more courageous in loving the world. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep my eye on the clock and talk for about 15 minutes and then open it up. So if as I'm answering questions or talking, it sparks a thought for you, please kind of hold on to that thought, and we'll just open it up for 10 minutes or so at the end. If you had an answer to a question, I'd love to hear that if you want to share. Okay. I have a few that came in on the internet when I posted about this on Facebook, and then it looks like maybe 10, 11, 12, 13, about 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, about 20 questions. And I haven't studied them a lot before or grouped them in any categories. So this is just raw. Okay. Why is it so hard for me to meditate regularly when I know how much better it makes me feel? Good question. I struggle with this too. The same, I think, is true for exercise or eating healthy. It can be so difficult to do things that we know are good for us, I think because we have so many other options. There's so many things you could do with your time other than meditate, other than come to church, other than eat green vegetables. And so we're faced with so many choices that it's overwhelming, and we live in a time where so many people are making so many different choices that there's not necessarily a strong, cohesive narrative that helps you limit your options. I think that's actually one reason some people are drawn to more fundamentalist communities, is it's a very clear answer. For example, in a Mormon church, how do you be a good person? They have a very prescriptive list that tells you how to be a good man, how to be a good father, how to be a good mother. And I think that can be there's a little bit of a feedback there. That can be very comforting and reassuring in a world of so many options. So I think it's hard for us to meditate in particular because the world tells us that we're good when we're productive. We're good when we check things off our to-do list. And sometimes people get credit for spiritual practices. As a minister, I think I get credit, right? People expect me to meditate every day or pray every day, and sometimes that actually makes it easier for me to do it, that other people are holding an expectation for me to do it. So if you're someone who's trying to meditate or do a spiritual practice more, I would encourage you to share that intention with somebody who will check you on it, who will call you up and say, "Did you meditate today? You probably still have time." Different things motivate different people. There's a book called, it's by Gretchen Rubin. It might be called Happiness or Better Than Before. But she talks about how different people have different things that motivate them. Some people are motivated by what I was saying, like having someone to respond to. That's called an obliger. Like, I'm motivated when I know someone's going to call me and ask if I've meditated. Some people are very internally motivated, and they make the decision to do it, and they do the research on why it's good for them, and it's not that hard for them to commit to it. You probably know someone like that who's runs every morning or does something that you wish you did every morning is easier for them. And some people actually are complete resistors when it comes to motivation. If there's an expectation for them to do it, that's actually motivation for them not to do it. And we may have different, all of that may be inside of us all at once as well. So I think if you're trying to do something that's difficult more often, find out what does motivate you. Yeah. Okay, 1. Okay, this says, what is a good death? Yeah. As a clergy person, you have a real honored position oftentimes when you're invited to be with someone when they're dying. And it's an incredible experience, because you may or may not know that person that well. But what I have seen in people dying, when I've been with people when they died, is that what makes a good death is ultimately acceptance. Acceptance for the conditions of their life, acceptance for the conditions of their death. And that can be a quite tall order. And I've also think, one of my mentors says that she says, most people die very well. And I think that that's important to hold on to, because I think the media, the wider world can tell you the opposite. It can tell you that death is super painful or very scary. And when I've actually been with people who've been dying, that hasn't been what I've seen. And that hasn't been most of the stories that I've heard with people who were with death of their loved ones. So I think it can be quite individual, but often in death, I think you do see a reflection of what has happened in someone's life. If they have loved deeply and shown up for other people, love shows up for them in their death. And some people haven't loved well or have had more difficult, challenging experiences. And in those situations, it's often a chaplain or a hospice person who's with someone when they die. And there can still be a good death in that situation, but that it is often, how you die is often how you lived. Okay. This one says, how can we hold on to the first principle in light of current White House inhabitant and his violent, racist mobs? Yes. The first principle. So the first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So our faith says that Donald Trump has inherent worth and dignity. And if that's a stretch for you, like it is for me most days, one of the teachings that I go to is imagining him as a young child. Imagining him as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. I don't think he had a very loving family life. And so I can feel some compassion for Donald Trump when I think of him as a young child. This doesn't excuse his outrageous behavior in the present. That absolutely needs to be considered. And I don't think we are asked to feel loving or even be kind or nice to people when they are doing things that are egregiously violent and destructive. I think there's a place for anger and judgment. But I think ultimately that anger and judgment must also come with a recognition of humanity. I wouldn't want Donald Trump to be tortured. I wouldn't actually want him to be in solitary confinement for the rest of his life. I think that potentially, I can see why some people would want that. People whose lives have been destroyed by the immigration system, people who Joe Arpaio tortured in his holding cells in Arizona. So I can also understand why there might be that much hatred and disgust. But I think that teachers like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day worked with people who were in immense suffering and still taught them that there was a way to love and hold on to a love that was more powerful than fear and hatred. So I think that in our thinking about the political system, we have to continue to hold on to that bigger love, and that our actions need to come from that place rather than from a place of retaliation. Because I don't think ultimately that retaliation will produce the world we want to live in, or that we want for our children or for the planet. Yeah. There might be more like that. I haven't looked at them all. It's a good question right now. Okay. If Adam and Eve were the first people and they had 2 sons, where did all the other people come from? Where did they find women to beget with? Yeah. Great question. As a Unitarian Universalist, I am not a biblical literist, meaning I do not believe what is written in the Bible was the historical record of what happened. So I don't think that humanity began with Adam and Eve and their incestuous children. No. That's a great distinguishing thing about our tradition versus many strands of Christianity. So we came from, our religious ancestors said that there are other sources of wisdom other than the Bible, such as Charles Darwin and evolutionary science. And we will not look at sources of wisdom that are not based in historical or scientific evidence as being historically or scientifically accurate. We may look at those sources of wisdom for their teachings about meaning and suffering and why are we here and origin, but not in terms of origin of like our biological bodies, but in terms of origin of story, origin of relationship, origin of culture. Okay. Why are we born to suffer and die? Yeah. So this is really interesting because it kind of relates to the Adam and Eve story. In the original Genesis story, God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden because Eve does something wrong in seeking knowledge. Very questionable. Notice the patriarchy there. But there's this old story that we're born to suffer and die. And so I think that's a really great thing to wrestle with. It's very relevant. Suffering, I think, happens because we don't live in a perfect world. There's not perfect justice, perfect equity of distribution of wealth or ability or health. And so people suffer. I think people will always suffer. I think that the Buddha talks about life as suffering. So his tradition and Buddhism offers a path, it says it offers a path out of suffering. And I think that that is something also to wrestle with and think about. Because suffering is a reality, but so is connection. So is joy. So is love. Those are also realities. Beauty, is a reality. There's crippling illness and there's sunflowers. There's devastation and war and there's Mozart. So I think that what we can learn from suffering, what suffering can motivate us to do if we hold it tenderly, is to create more art and beauty and compassion in the world. If suffering has a purpose, I would say that the purpose of suffering is to connect us more deeply to other people. There's a story, we've maybe preached from this or we will, a Buddhist story about a woman who has lost her son, and she's in deep, deep grief. And the Buddha tells her to go and find mustard seeds from a house where no one has ever felt sadness and grief. So she sets out in the village and she knocks on the door and she says, I'm looking for a house where no one has felt sadness and grief because I need some mustard seeds. And every door she knocks on, the response is, oh no, we have known grief. We have known suffering. So I think the lessons that we can learn from suffering are around compassion and service and care for one another. I think if no one ever suffered, we might be very selfish creatures. And I don't know that that's a world I would want to live in, even though it might feel good for a while. I don't know if it would feel good for a lifetime. And dying, why are we born to suffer and die? Well, again, I would go to evolution and biological teachings that show the universe as being in a constant state of disintegration and regeneration. All matter from the beginning of the origin of the universe has been in this cycle. So I think that because we are physical creatures, we too are part of that cycle. And I also think it would be very unhappy to be immortal. I think that would, actually, you would see so much suffering if you were immortal. I wouldn't wish that on any of my loved ones, myself. Okay. Are active spiritual practices, such as walking, as effective, enriching as sitting still to think? Yes. I think so. In fact, I think they can be more at times for me. Again, with spiritual practice, I think it's easy to digest a list of shoulds. And that at the core of spiritual practice, I think, is about renewal and reconnection. So if it leads to renewal and reconnection, I would say that you're on the right track. That's why I hope many of you go hiking later today or spend some time looking out the window. Yeah. I believe forgiveness is an important practice for spiritual wellness. Me too. Any tips for what promotes that when it is hard? Yeah. I took a whole class on forgiveness. It was a year-long class in seminary. And so I've done a lot of thinking about forgiveness and writing about it. And we'll preach a little bit about it sometime this year. One of the specific things I will say is that, again, it can be easy to hear the story of I should forgive. I would be a better person if I forgave. And if it's coming out of that thinking, you're probably getting stuck. So again, I would encourage people to think about forgiveness as a choice. And a choice that you can make, and to see the benefits of that choice for yourself. Ultimately, I think forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. When we hold on to resentment and anger about something from the past, ultimately we are putting ourselves in a cage, in a box that can tighten us internally And so I think there's a choice to untighten resentment and anger through forgiveness. And I think it's almost one of those things that you can start doing sort of passively and see what happens actively. So for example, one of my teachers suggests saying, like, just like me, if I was really angry with my father, I might start with saying, just like me, my father is a human. Just like me, my father has faults. Just like me, my father struggles. Just like me, my father wants to be loved. And even if I don't immediately feel forgiving towards him, over time, I think that practice has helped me at least let go of some of the enemy images that I've held of people who've hurt me or situations that have been difficult. So that's my forgiveness tip. And I'd be happy to talk to whoever wrote this card more about this, because this is a really powerful thing, and I'd love to speak with you more. How can I face fear instead of succumbing to it? How can I face fear instead of succumbing to it? It's hard to know how to answer this question because it's kind of like fear of what? Because I think there's some good things to be afraid of. And I wouldn't want to advise recklessness or harmful behavior. But if it's a fear around something that you think the fear is limiting you from like being your best self, I think the first thing I would do is kind of journal about what you're afraid of, or talk to a good friend about what you're afraid of. Like, I think often fear can be in the back, kind of animal, primal, what's the word I'm looking for? Animal, you know what I'm talking about? Lizard brain. It can be in the lizard brain, and when we give it some words and time and attention, it may de-escalate, even if we do that internally through like journaling or talking to a friend maybe. And again, I think an accountability buddy can be powerful. If you have a fear, like a fear of, I don't know, flying, or a fear of forgiving someone, if you can share with someone you trust and who cares about you, that's your fear, and you have something you want to do bigger than that fear, getting support, not being afraid to ask for help. I think sometimes our biggest fears are around asking for help or letting people know we're afraid, and we end up acting in really stupid ways out of fear instead of just saying, I'm afraid, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. I think that's a really courageous thing to say, actually, in almost every situation. I know, I can't remember if I preached about this, but one time in a job interview, I was like really excited about this job, and I called my mom and I was like, what if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? She was like, you can just say you don't know. It was like a huge light bulb went off. I was like, that's brilliant, Mom. I'll tell them I don't know. Yeah. Okay, how are we doing on time? Maybe another, let's see, keep going? Quarter after? Okay. How to maintain/allow a sense of wellness, even joy, in the midst of a world turmoil, political, environmental, economic. Yeah, this is on everyone's hearts, right? I strongly believe in gratitude practices. So even on my worst days, I try to list 3 things I'm grateful for. And I think you can do the same thing with beauty. You can list 3 beautiful things you saw that day, or interactions that you witnessed or were a part of. Because like I was saying about, why are we born into a world of suffering? You could ask the same question, why are we born into a world of beauty? So it's so important, I think, to keep awareness about what our lenses are. If we're looking for turmoil and despair, we're going to find it. If we're looking for the helpers, if we're looking for vulnerability and possibility, we're going to find it. What is Islam? What is radical Islamic faith? How do we build understanding and acceptance? Great question. Islam is one of the major religions of the world. It was started by the Prophet Muhammad in like the 6th or 7th century in the area now known as Mecca or Medina. Its primary teachings, my teachers taught me, were of peace, humility, brotherly, siblingly love. Like all major religions, there is a fundamentalist, extremist wing spectrum. This is true of Christianity. It's true of Unitarian Universalism. There are people who are kind of fundamentalist Unitarian Universalists who I have beef with. And so I would say that there's several great videos actually online of kind of people from Islam saying, like, what you see as terrorism and is called Islam is not my faith. Please don't associate that violence with the teachings that I follow and adhere to. So I think we often hear a lot of news about a fairly small, in terms of numbers, radical faction of what is in fact a huge global religion that has enormous charity organizations, provides incredible spiritual support to people in many communities. So how do you build acceptance and understanding? I would say get to know some friendly Muslims. Yeah, they're out there. They're here on the North Shore. There's a mosque, yeah, on the North Shore, right near the neighborhood Marcus and I used to live in. So I would say question heavily what you hear about radical Islam on the news as representing the global majority's religion. They say what you resist persists. So true. We are called as social justice-hearted people to do the work of anti-racism, anti-homophobia, anti-sexism, awareness, and practice. Sometimes the anti-work feels like a shackle to someone else's worldview. How can we rise above others' fear-based ideologies and avoid shackling ourselves to anti and resistance and power on through to something much better? Yes! Let's do it! Come join the social action team, whoever wrote this question. We're figuring this out now. Yes, I think this is incredibly important. Again, the lens question comes in. It's so easy oftentimes to name what we don't believe or what we don't like or what we are against. It can be more difficult to name and articulate what we do believe, what we do want. I don't know a whole lot about this, but I think there's actual psychological science around this, right? It's easy for people to think negative thoughts, and actually takes literally more brain power to think positive thoughts. So I think that has something to do with it. And this is actually one of the reasons I became a minister, because I got very burnt out as an activist fighting against things, and I needed something to say that I was for, and to be around people who were for that thing also, not just against something without a vision of what we were for. So this is, I think, the power of what Martin Luther King calls beloved community, the welcome table. All visions of kind of justice and paradise are incredibly valuable, because if we don't have a vision of what we want, we will recreate what we're against very easily. Who are the people you consider having been your mentors, and how did you become a Unitarian? I became a Unitarian I was in high school, and I had very curly hair, and I met another girl at the skating rink in high school who had very curly hair, and we kind of became instant friends. We're also both vegetarians. And she invited me to a sleepover at her house, and I said yes. And I went, and in the morning, my mom was going to come pick me up, but she lived kind of on the other side of town. And so her mom said, "Oh, I can drive you home, but first we're going to go to church." And I was like, nah, like, I don't go to church, it's cool, I'll just wait for my mom to pick me up. And she said, "Well, this church is different, you might like it." And I grew up in a Christian family. They were kind of liberal Presbyterians in the South, in these states. And I had rejected Christianity because I had a friend in school, my Catholic school, who was from a Hindu family. And I've told this story in sermons before, but I didn't believe that my Hindu friend was going to hell. And when that kind of became clear to me at like age 10 or 12, I pretty much just stopped going to Christian church because I didn't believe that you were going to hell if you didn't have a friend in Jesus. So at this church, I ended up going, and it was the first time I heard an openly gay person speak in public. This was the kind of the height of the Bible Belt evangelism. Lived in a very conservative community, and most people were closeted if they were LGBTQ. And I was stunned. And afterwards, everyone, like we do in this church, stands up and holds hands and sings about peace and love. And I thought, if this is church, like, I'm in. If you can be gay and you can sing about peace and love, I'm in. So I started going to the youth group and then got involved in youth leadership. And at the time, there was a pretty strong youth leadership program, and I just kind of kept doing the next youth leadership thing. And then in university, I studied sociology, and I learned a lot about what was messed up about the world, and got pretty disillusioned and burnt out. And it was the faith community that kind of kept on drawing me in and in and in and in and in. So that's why I'm a minister. And my mentors, many. I have a kind of a professional mentor. Her name is Robin Tanner, and she's a social justice minister at a congregation in New Jersey. I don't know, I haven't been mentored by like any names you would know, but I've taken classes from Joanna Macy, from Rebecca Parker, from other kind of more known progressive theologians. Yeah. In your experience, are there Unitarian churches that have a stronger Christian context than ours? Absolutely, yes. There's Unitarian churches, particularly on the East Coast, who use the Bible, who use the liturgy, who have a more Christian-focused liturgy and practice. Okay, Marcus is giving me the signal. Oh yeah, we have 5 minutes. Okay, let me just see if I can do these 3 really fast. It's so fun to complete things. Okay, how is it possible to move from pain and anger to forgiveness when the facts remain the same? Is anything unforgivable? Okay, good, we talked about that a little bit. Is anything unforgivable? I would say I'm not qualified to answer. Maybe so. At least, it's hard to answer on a cosmic level. What do you particularly appreciate about the North Shore congregation? Oh my gosh, I can't answer that shortly. That'll just have to come in a sermon. How do your experiences in large UU churches prepare you for ministry in a church our size? Again, I'm going to have to save that one. But I would say that the gift of large congregations is that you can see multiple programs and multiple ways things are done. And when you serve a smaller congregation, often things are done in just one way, and it's been done that way for 10 or 20 years. And so it can give you the opportunity to say, like, oh, there actually is another way to do something. I've seen it. I've helped with it. And then there was one question, if we assume there is an afterlife, can souls communicate with one another? Is there a common soul language? I have no idea. But it's fascinating to think about. And it would be really cool if they could.